I'm Sophia Carter, CEO of a growing tech company. I've worked hard to get to where I am today, but my journey hasn't been without challenges. A car accident a few years ago left me in a wheelchair, but I've never let that define who I am or stop me from pursuing my goals. One of the things I pride myself on is being a hands-on leader. I don't just sit in my office all day. I like to interact with my employees, see how they're doing, and understand what's happening on every level of the company. It helps me stay connected to the people who make our company thrive. That's why, on this particular day, I decided to take the elevator down to the cafeteria and grab lunch with some of my team. Little did I know, this ordinary moment would turn into something unforgettable. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day where the office hummed with a mix of focused energy and midweek fatigue. The chatter of coworkers echoed down the hallways, phones buzzed incessantly on desks, and keyboards clattered in rhythmic unison. I had just wrapped up a meeting and was heading to another floor to review some reports. As I wheeled myself into the elevator, I nodded politely to the 3 employees already inside, offering them a warm smile. They gave a polite nod in return, their conversation trailing off as the elevator doors slid closed. Just as the doors were about to seal, a hand shot through the gap, triggering the sensors to reopen them. A woman hurried in, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. She looked flustered, her arms full of folders and her phone balanced precariously on top. She exhaled loudly, an exaggerated sigh that seemed to suggest the universe had conspired against her today. Her name tag caught my eye: Karen Blake. I recognized her vaguely. She worked in the marketing department, though we had never interacted directly. She didn't glance at anyone as she stepped inside, instead shooting an irritated glance at the crowded space. Her eyes flickered over me briefly, but she quickly looked away, her expression tight and unreadable. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe she was just having a bad day. I focused on the soft hum of the elevator motor as it began its descent, silently preparing myself for the next task on my to-do list. But then, as the floors ticked by, her presence became impossible to ignore. The elevator had barely descended a few floors when Karen suddenly huffed, the sound loud enough to cut through the quiet murmur of tension. She shifted her weight dramatically, making it clear she was annoyed, though it wasn't immediately obvious why. Then, in a low voice that carried just enough for everyone to hear, she muttered, "Why do people like you even take up space in elevators? Don't you have, other ways to get around?" The words hit me like a cold slap. My hands gripped the wheels of my chair instinctively, the polished metal cool against my palms. For a moment, the air in the elevator seemed to freeze. The other employees exchanged uneasy glances, their faces betraying a mix of shock and discomfort, but no one spoke up. Karen, however, seemed completely unfazed by the silence. In fact, she appeared to feed off it. She rolled her eyes and folded her arms, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "This is just great," she added, shaking her head. "Now we're all packed in here, and it's moving so slow. Typical." The implication was clear. She wasn't just annoyed at the elevator or the wait, she was annoyed at me. Her words hung in the air like an unpleasant odor, leaving everyone in the small space squirming. My heart thudded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had dealt with people like Karen before, people who assumed that a wheelchair defined my worth, that my presence was an inconvenience. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a mix of anger and humiliation, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I took a deep breath, my gaze fixed on the glowing elevator panel as it ticked down the floors. My silence wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a choice. I reminded myself that I didn't need to stoop to her level, that her words said more about her character than they ever could about mine. The elevator felt like it was moving in slow motion, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The elevator chimed softly, signaling its stop on the cafeteria floor. A few employees shuffled out, leaving just me and Karen behind. I adjusted my chair to move forward, but Karen took a deliberate step into my path, blocking the way. Her posture was rigid, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "people like you should really be more considerate. Taking up all this space, making things harder for everyone else, it's just ridiculous." Her words struck a nerve, their sharpness cutting through the carefully maintained composure I had been clinging to. My grip on my wheels tightened for a moment as I processed what she had said. It wasn't just the insult, it was the sheer audacity of it, delivered without a hint of shame or self-awareness. I could feel the stares of the remaining employees lingering in the elevator, their silence and almost tangible weight pressing down on the space. The tension was thick, but I refused to let her see how deeply her words had stung. Taking a steadying breath, I met her gaze directly. "I'm sorry if I've inconvenienced you," I said evenly, my tone calm yet firm. Then I added, gesturing toward the doors, "Please, go ahead." Karen scoffed, a dismissive sound that hung in the air as she turned sharply on her heel. She walked out of the elevator, her heels clicking loudly against the polished floor, leaving me to navigate the doors on my own. For a split second, I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me again, their discomfort as palpable as my own. But I refused to let it define the moment. I adjusted my chair, positioned myself carefully, and wheeled forward, my head held high. I told myself not to dwell on it. People like Karen weren't worth my energy. I had worked too hard, overcome too many challenges to let one person's cruelty derail my day. With that thought firmly in mind, I pushed forward, determined to focus on the work that lay ahead. An hour later, I found myself heading into the conference room for a scheduled meeting with the marketing team. My mind was already buzzing with ideas for the upcoming campaign. The earlier encounter with Karen, nothing more than a shadow at the back of my thoughts. As I rolled into the room, the familiar hum of pre-meeting chatter filled the air. The team members greeted me with smiles, their energy lifting my spirits. But as my gaze swept across the room, it landed on a face that instantly stood out. She was seated near the back of the room, a notebook open in front of her, a pen dangling loosely from her fingers. The moment she saw me enter, her entire demeanor changed. Her eyes widened in recognition, her posture stiffened, and the confident, almost smug expression she'd worn earlier was replaced by a mix of shock and discomfort. I kept my expression neutral, choosing not to acknowledge her reaction as I rolled toward the head of the table. A hush fell over the room as I settled into place, the subtle shift in energy signaling the start of the meeting. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began, my tone professional and composed. "Let's get started." As the discussion unfolded, I couldn't help but notice Karen's unease. She kept her head down, her fingers fidgeting nervously with her pen. Every now and then, her gaze darted toward me before quickly looking away, as though she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Finally, one of the team leads, a longtime colleague, spoke up, addressing me directly. "Sophia, your vision for the upcoming campaign has really inspired us," he said with a smile. "Your hands-on approach as CEO is something we all admire." The words hung in the air for a moment, their weight sinking into the room. Karen's reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened even further, her face draining of color as the realization fully hit her. I glanced her way briefly, catching the flicker of panic in her expression. She looked like she wanted to melt into her chair, her discomfort now impossible to hide. The confident, dismissive Karen from the elevator was gone, replaced by someone who clearly regretted her earlier actions. But I didn't dwell on her reaction. I focused instead on the task at hand, leading the meeting with the same professionalism and dedication that had gotten me to where I was today. Still, the irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Life had a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected ways. The meeting had wrapped up smoothly, with the team energized by the discussion and eager to move forward with the campaign. I stayed behind to organize my notes, enjoying the rare moment of quiet in the usually bustling conference room. As I adjusted my papers, I noticed Karen lingering near the doorway. Her confident demeanor from earlier in the day was gone, replaced by an almost hesitant energy. She clutched her notebook tightly against her chest, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the edges of the cover. I looked up and met her eyes. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and walked toward me. "Miss Carter," she began, her voice shaky, betraying her nerves. I wanted to say something." I leaned back slightly in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. "Go ahead, Karen," I said calmly, though my tone carried the weight of expectation. She swallowed hard, her gaze flickering to the floor before she looked back at me. I didn't realize you were the CEO, she stammered, her cheeks flushing a deep shade of red. I'm so sorry for what I said earlier. I wasn't thinking. Her words came out in a rush, as if she was desperate to get them out, before her courage failed her. I could see the genuine regret in her eyes, but I didn't let her off the hook so easily. I held her gaze, my expression calm but firm. Karen, I said evenly, it's not about who I am. It shouldn't matter whether I'm the CEO, an intern, or someone visiting the building. Everyone deserves respect, no matter their role or their circumstances. Her face fell slightly, the weight of my words sinking in. She nodded quickly, her embarrassment written all over her features. You're right, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I was completely out of line. I shouldn't have said those things, and I feel terrible about it. I allowed a brief pause, letting the moment hang in the air before continuing. Words can hurt, Karen, I said, my tone softening slightly, but still carrying the authority of someone who had learned that lesson the hard way. It's important to be mindful of how we treat others. You never know what someone might be going through, or who they might be. She nodded again, this time more slowly, as if she was truly taking the message to heart. You're absolutely right, she said, her voice steadier now. I'm really sorry. I'll do better. I studied her for a moment, searching for any sign of insincerity, but all I saw was genuine remorse. Finally, I allowed myself a small smile. Apology accepted, I said gently. Let's move forward from here. Her shoulders seemed to relax slightly, and she offered me a tentative smile in return. Thank you, she said quietly. As she turned to leave, I watched her go, hoping the encounter had left a lasting impression. Everyone makes mistakes. It's how we learn from them that truly matters. With a deep breath, I returned my focus to my notes, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. Sometimes, all it takes is a moment of accountability to spark a real change. As Karen left the room, I couldn't help but reflect on the encounter. Moments like these reminded me why I worked so hard to create a workplace that values inclusivity and kindness. Life has a way of teaching lessons in unexpected ways. For Karen, I hope this was a turning point, a moment that would make her more thoughtful in the future. For me, it was a reaffirmation of the values I hold dear: resilience, compassion, and the power of leading by example. Kindness, after all, costs nothing, but its impact can be immeasurable. Thank you so much for watching. If this story moved you or gave you something to think about, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. We'd also love for you to share this video with your friends and family. It could be the reminder someone needs about kindness and respect. And of course, drop a comment below to share your thoughts or tell us about a time when you saw kindness make a difference. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us keep creating meaningful content for you. Thank you.